Welcome to Pondering Psalms. We are pondering Psalm 105 this week. What a beautiful psalm. What a story that it tells. And Dave and I are going to come back right after this, and we're going to spend some time thinking about the passage, thinking about what it means for our lives, and how then we can respond to that. So join us.
I just feel like there's a wall between us.
Oh, this is for your office?
Yeah. I told her I wanted it green screen green. And she said no. I'm thinking, you know how cool that would be?
I hate the fact that I have a turkey tail on my wall from when I went hunting turkey, and they all went, "Oh, I thought it was like a geisha fan. I thought it was like Japanese."
That's the thing. I don't think people actually recognize how just cruel you are.
All right, welcome back. We are excited about jumping into this. Well, maybe excited is too energetic. Maybe that's too high of a.
Come on, man. I think we are excited. We're always excited. That's the thing. We're always excited.
Now, I will say with 105, Psalm 105,
it's a bit of work.
It's a long one, but it's a story. So it's not like you're having to think about this great theological mystery. You just read the story.
That's true. So, ready to jump into it?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay.
Let's do Psalm 105.
There we go.
105. Yeah. Psalm 105. Give thanks to the Lord. Now, we are not going to read this whole thing, right?
No, we're not. And I think if we spend some time kind of at the start of it and then at the end of it, because the middle of it, and if it's okay, I'll just give it away, talks a lot about them coming out of Egypt.
Yeah.
That was a very formative. We all have those places in life that we believe are formative, and they're stories that we might continue to go back to over and over and over again. Yeah. And for the Israelites, it was how God rescued them from Egypt.
But I don't know that we. So let's go ahead and say it starts in verse 12. The story itself starts in verse 12. All right. Okay. I mean, so just to set it all up, so that as we're talking about verses 1 through 11, understand that it's going toward the story of when God first makes the promise to Abraham and how he takes them all the way through. If you watch the movie The Ten Commandments, you pretty much get the story, right? I mean, that's pretty much it.
That's true.
So let's use that as the background. Okay. That is the lion's share of this particular passage. But you know what it did for me? Do you want me to go ahead and?
Yeah. What did it do for you?
What it did for me was it just to your point, we all have a story, or we all have moments, we all have formative events. We don't. I don't think that we retell them as often as we should.
I would agree.
And I came away from this thinking, you know what? I have 2 or 3 moments in my life, but I don't know that I could I haven't passed those down to my kids. My kids would never say, when God visited Dad when he was in 7th grade at Camp Adventure, and that promise was put, and Dad always lived that out, and then I picked that up, and I've been living with that as well. That's we don't have these generational stories very often about our journey with God. And I don't know if that's good or bad. I mean, there are no such things. What's the phrase? There are no such things as God's grandchildren.
Yeah, I remember something like that.
Something like that. But, and I don't know if that matters, but at the same time, even in my own life, I don't have anything written down to say, I did this, God did this, God did this, God did this, which is what this story is.
And I think, one of the things the psalmist might be trying to accomplish is to remind Israel of what God has done.
No doubt.
I didn't get a sense of when this might have been written or used, but he begins with this whole give thanks to the Lord and proclaim his greatness. Let the whole world know what he had done. Sing to him, yes, sing his praises. And then what's the next word, Kirk?
Tell.
Who?
Oh, everyone.
About what?
Uh, are we doing this the whole thing?
No, just humor me.
His wonderful deeds.
Yeah, which is exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That we don't do that enough. His wonderful deeds. Well, what did he do in your life? How did you
Yes.
get to this point in your faith journey? Well, back you were in seventh grade. You said so. What? Back in the late 40s, God came and revealed Himself to you.
I can go back to when I was 4 and 5. I can go back to singing with my brother in the Selma United Methodist Church. I can think about how God was present in all along in different ways. And but where do I relive that? How do I
Yeah.
retell that? Now, this says to tell everyone.
Right. Yeah.
That could get pretty annoying. I think people go,
Well,
"Hey, did I tell you when I was 5? I sang his hand, put your hand in the hand of the man."
maybe it depends on how you tell the story. Because some people, talk about various things that happen in their lives, and this is so important. It's kind of like, how can we say it in a way that is more invitational rather than putting off folks.
Just walk up next to somebody in the mall. Hey,
Can I tell you about how Jesus rescued me?
but I think even telling it to myself, it's like,
That would be good.
I was really challenged to do some journaling about this, about what happened in these moments, and we get to the end of this. Well, we won't spoil it, but at the end
Yeah.
of this psalm, there's a reason why you ought to be
Yeah.
remembering all of these things. So let's go ahead and keep with verse 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, so it's about giving thanks, remembering in verse 5, because that's again what we're talking about, the
Yeah.
wonders He's performed, and then He moves into you descendants of Jacob, you chosen ones, basically reminding them He's our God,
Yeah.
and what God has done. And then verse 9, the covenant with Abraham is what you got to, starting with
Right.
Abraham,
Yep.
and then Jacob, and then Canaan, and then he moves into the story of really Joseph, but here he's still telling the story of Abraham, really.
But I love, you were talking about different ways of telling this story. Verse 12, I really like verse 12. He said this when they were few in number,
Yeah,
a tiny group of strangers,
yeah,
in Canaan. And I really like that because when you go back and read it, you don't get a sense of that that's the reality of it. I mean, yes, he's called one man with, some family, but you don't think about this tiny group of strangers
yeah.
wandering and trusting. And I like the way that the psalmist tells this story. I really liked it.
It builds. I mean, I
Mm.
think that's what you're saying. It
Yeah.
builds. It starts out small, and then it continues to build. And yeah, except the fonts get smaller because we're trying to fit more on the screen. And then how God had used even a famine in the land. And then you've got the story of Joseph.
And again, verse 18, my memory is that there's nothing mentioned about his feet being bruised or a collar of iron around his neck.
Not that I know of, but
And
he was in the dungeon, so
yeah, but I mean, I love that the fact that,
yeah,
that the psalmist has kind of maybe taken, well, it could be one of two things, right? Either he's taking liberties with the story, he's kind of creative license, or in fact, this is part of the oral history that has been
yeah,
passed down to say, this is what
or
happened to Joseph.
written history that we don't have access to.
Yeah, yeah.
You
But
know,
I love it because it shines a different light on it.
yes, it does. It does. And then he tells the whole story of Joseph and how he started in prison and made it to be the king's aide, and basically instruct the king as he pleased and teach the king's advisor. And then finally, Israel arrived in Egypt. However, he
Yeah.
multiplied folks, they got bigger, and then he turned the Egyptians against the Israelites, and they plotted against the Lord's servant. And that's when we get in this whole thing of being slaves in this land for 400 years, crying out to God. And the reality is God didn't leave them there.
Yeah.
Again, it's just the story of Israel going through the 10 plagues. If you're in verse 27, it's like, what in the world is he talking about? It's the 10 Commandments. We've seen the movie.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. They still play. Yeah, they still play that.
Oh, I bought it on Amazon. I watch it every Easter.
Oh, well, good for you. Good for you.
I am true to the Word of God.
You are.
Cecil B. DeMille's version of it.
Yes. And then this whole thing is about the plagues, what God has done.
Yep.
And really, it feels like that's the bulk of this psalm. If you take it all the way back to Abraham, it is the bulk of God. But as I was reading through it, it felt like the 10 plagues was the bulk, how God rescued his people. And I love verse 38. Egypt was glad when they were gone.
Don't let the door hit you on the way out there, buddy.
Yeah. Just get out of here. Doesn't really talk about how Egypt actually went chasing after them. But, again.
That's another story.
Yeah, it is. It is. And how God protected them in the wilderness. They asked for meat. He sent them quail. He satisfied their hunger with manna, bread from heaven. He split a rock open. And I could almost hear the psalmist telling it. Can you believe it? He split a rock. I mean, who does that? Water came out. And why?
Oh my gosh.
What's
you got really excited about a rock there for a minute.
Well, yeah. I mean, come on. The question isn't why am I getting excited about a rock splitting open? The question is why aren't you?
Well, we've talked about this. In fact, a lot of times in the Psalms, this is referenced. This particular, this particular moment. There are two times when water came from a rock, and the psalmists have. We must not really have a good appreciation of how important that was to the psalmist.
Apparently not.
Or to the Israelite story. Because
let me ask you this: how many rocks have you split open?
All kinds.
How many did water come out of?
0.
Yeah. See.
I'm lucky to get something out of a coconut, let alone a rock. By the time I'm all done. Yeah, it's a big deal. I mean, it speaks to the provision of God, right? I mean, that's it entirely, and that's why multiple psalms have this context, this story in it, because the manna, the quail, the water from a rock, those, all of my needs are met because of God acting in my life.
Yeah. And, not only did God rescue them from Egypt, he also provided for them in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And I have to keep switching over. There we go. So, and here we go. I think this is really the point of the whole psalm. Really, verse 45, I think is.
Yeah.
He brought his people out of Egypt with joy, his chosen ones with rejoicing, which was, the case. They were slaves there. It wasn't good. He brings them out. They're excited, joyful. He gave his people the lands of pagan nations, and they harvested crops that others had planted. All this happened. I love that. He gets to the end and he goes, if you're wondering why all this happened,
Exactly. Here's the big reveal, folks. If you've been wondering what we were talking about, all this happened. Now, for those of you who are not aware, we're also doing a Pondering of Ephesians right now. We're doing a live show, but we also have a recording of that. And you mentioned a couple of weeks ago that when you see the phrase "so that," right? So that, and I actually made a note of that in my Bible there. So that is kind of implied, right? All this happened so that they would follow his decree. So it's a really important moment in the passage in all of the psalm. What was it you said about the so that?
I think I said a phrase of intention, but I think it's more a phrase of purpose.
A phrase of purpose. And It's just beautiful. So when
Yeah.
and what was cool is you brought that up in the Pondering Ephesians, and when I read it here, it was like, oh, that's a
Yeah.
so that. It's an
Yeah.
unspoken that, but it's a so that.
Yeah. And so it's like, the recounting everything that God had done, his rescue. Well, not just the rescue, the Genesis,
Yeah. Yeah.
with Abraham, the
Yeah.
Genesis, and the fact that the story is going somewhere. It's not that there's gaps. I mean, the story is moving, and it moved through some pretty strange places, such as dungeons and high places in Egypt, and then these difficult places with slavery, and then this wonderful place of being rescued and then taken care of. And he says all of this happened for one reason, so that they would follow his decrees and obey his instructions.
So this is where then what I was mentioning earlier, my own story, when you start to reflect on your journey and where God has been active in that, it's no different than in verse 45.
Yeah.
Why do I want to retell this story? Why do I want to relive these moments? It's to remind me that all of these things have happened so that I would follow the decrees and obey God's instructions.
Yeah.
He's led me to this place for that one reason.
If you take a look, here's some connection. If you take a look at 1 John chapter 2, verse 3,
Okay.
it says, how can you be sure that you know him? He's talking about God.
Mm-hmm.
How can you be sure? And John answers with, if you obey his commandments. It's that pure and simple. But see, I have a sense that I want to resist that. I want to say, oh, well, I know him because I prayed this prayer back when I was in 7th grade. I know him because, maybe because I've done a Bible study or because I go to church. But John says, no, how can we be sure that we know him? If we obey his commandments.
Well, and that is where we fall into that trap, and where we say, well, I grew up in the church, therefore.
Yeah.
Well, that's not enough. Just showing up every Sunday doesn't get you there.
Yeah.
Obeying the commandments get you there. Or you say, well, my mom and dad had me baptized when I was a baby. It's not enough. You've got it. It's an active life. It's an active relationship.
Yeah.
Where and honestly, let me go back, Dave. You don't have to pull up the slides or anything. You don't have to. All right. Well,
but I can.
In verses 7 through 11, and not 7-11, but 7 through 11, covenant is mentioned 3 times. Right.
Okay, that's a good observation.
As I was reading through this, I noticed that in that section, and then towards the end, you're talking about the promise of God, and that's the covenant that is the relationship is built. And he started with, the covenant is commitment to 1,000 generations.
Yeah.
It starts with Abraham, moves to Isaac, and then goes to Jacob, this decree. But it's this never ending covenant with the people of God, the people who follow his commandments. I love that part of it.
And that's a really good observation. A very deep insight, because the way I see this flowing now is he begins by talking about giving thanks and remembering, and then he says, children of Abraham, his chosen ones, and then it's like, what is that? Well, it's his covenant. He always stands by it, and part of that covenant was verse 11, and then he starts on the story to remind them that this was the covenant. And he ends with, so what's our part of the covenant? Because the covenant goes both ways. It cuts both ways. So what's our part? Well, he did all of that so that we would follow his decrees and obey his instructions.
Go back up just one slide to 42. For he remembered his sacred promise, which is the covenant to his servant, Abraham. And that's another thing that jumped out for me, was that servant and his chosen.
Yeah.
So it's a relationship,
Yeah.
and so when you go then to 43 through 45, that's our part of it. Is God's going to lead us through all of this, but we can obey those instructions. We can follow His decrees, and we can fulfill that covenant. We can live in that.
And here's the counterintuitive part. In our culture, we've been told that joy and life comes through being free. And in our minds, being free is not having to follow anyone's instructions.
Yeah. I am
figured
my
out
own agent.
Yes. But what the scripture points to is freedom comes through obeying the right instructions. And you've got you with your limited sight, insight, hindsight's 20/20, but it's not, because there are things, our motivations that we aren't even clear about until we go through therapy much later. Right? And so we've got ourselves, and I tell people this. I said, I don't know why I want to follow myself, because I let myself down so often. But then you have this being who created the universe, who put the stars in the sky, who apparently loves us because he continues to give us good things. That's what the psalmist is talking about. He says, look at this. Look at all he's done. Yeah. What better instructions could you follow? And the Bible points, it's God's instructions that leads to life, to joy, to peace, to all those things. And you are only hurting yourself if you resist his instructions, because he continues to do beautiful things, wonderful things, so that we will obey his instructions and thus find life.
And I like that, that he says he brought them out of Egypt with joy.
Yeah.
With rejoicing. I mean, it's like, I want to set you guys free. I want to make this possible. And I want to be engaged in that way.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yes. Beautiful. And I like it even better now after you pointed out the whole covenant thing, man.
And I would encourage anybody who maybe has only read this once or twice, or maybe you've read it every day this week, is to sit down and write your own story.
Yeah.
How has God been active in your life?
We all have a 30-minute story version of it, where we just kind of ramble on. What would a 3-minute story be that you could share it in 3 minutes?
Yeah. We're just write down in bullet points. You know, boom, here's a moment where God was present.
Or this is kind of hard. If you can boil it down to something like the blind man, when the Pharisees were really grilling him, and he said, you know what? I don't know about that. All I know is I once was blind, but now I'm free. Now I see.
Yeah.
So there you go.
But live in it for a while, because, the longer that you think about that, not even for presentation, but just for your own edification, is to say, oh my gosh, he was there too.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought I was in the darkest of nights, and there was that light. That one person who showed up. And
I was in the dungeon. I was in the dungeon of despair.
The pit of despair.
The fetters of fear.
Yep. Oh my gosh, you should be a pastor. All right, folks, we are at the end of our time.
Yes,
Thank you so much for joining us again. 106 is next week. 106, as we like to say in Pondering Passages.
Because it's not an O, it's a 0.
The Pondering Passages Network.
I can't wait till we can get to Psalm 110.
Where I went past that. Oh no, 110.
Yeah.
111.
Yeah.
112. We could just do that over and
110.
over again.
So we can
All right, folks. Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us. This was I love this passage. It's a real challenge to what it is that God's doing in our lives. And if you feel like you're in a dark place, remember where you've been.
And if you're watching this and you haven't watched any of the others, 106 is paired
or
with
100
this one.
Or 100.
I know. I said 106, and I keep saying it's not an O, it's a 0.
So next week, next week when we do 106, you'll see this story continue with a little different,
a little twist.
Yeah, a little twist.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thanks a lot for joining us. We will talk to you soon, and in the meantime, God bless. brilliant.
And
Yep, I like
it's
that.
like I used to say with our Lenten book. If you're going to read one book for Lent, read this one too. You like that?
That's very much. Oh, that's brilliant.